Psalm 110 verse 7 is a fitting conclusion to this prophetic messianic psalm. Verse 7 of Psalm 110 reads, "He shall drink of the brook by the wayside, therefore, he shall lift up the head." Jesus was obliged to drink of the brook from that bitter cup of suffering and tribulation which the Father put into his hand if he were to become the propitiation for sinful humanity and save any by satisfying the wrath of the Father that stood against our sin. Judged by sinful men and in a state of his humiliation, he willingly suffers the shame of the cross, followed by his victorious resurrection that has lifted him in eternal exaltation that will be confirmed forever before friends and enemies alike at the great white throne judgment. He is victorious and triumphant with his head raised up high above all his enemies. We read in John 18:1-3, Jesus went out with his disciples across the Kidron Valley and made his way to the Mount of Olives, where there was a garden, and he and his disciples went into it. The scriptural dialogue is completed in Luke 22:39-45, he went out and made his way as usual to the Mount of Olives, and the disciples followed him. When he reached the place, he told them, "Pray that you may not enter into temptation." Then he withdrew from them about a stone's throw, knelt down, and began to pray, "Father, if you are willing, take this cup away from me, nevertheless, not my will, but yours, be done." Then an angel from heaven appeared to him, strengthening him. Being in anguish, he prayed more fervently, and his sweat became like drops of blood falling to the ground. When he got up from prayer and came to the disciples, he found them sleeping, exhausted from their grief. Judged by men, he submitted like a lamb to the slaughter and allowed himself to be nailed to the cross. As God's wrath against the sins of the repentant was quelled and Jesus was about to die, he bowed his head. We read in John 19:30, when Jesus had received the sour wine, he said, "It is finished." Then bowing his head, he gave up his spirit. But on the third day, he was able to lift up his head by the power of his Spirit in the resurrection. He lifted up his head as a conqueror, indeed, as more than a conqueror. This denotes not only his right to adulation but also to his exaltation as Lord of Lords, not only by his former deity but his triumph over mortal flesh. We read in Colossians 2:13-15, "And when you were dead in trespasses and in the uncircumcision of your flesh, he made you alive with him and forgave us all our trespasses." He erased the certificate of debt, with its obligations, that was against us and opposed to us, and has taken it out of the way by nailing it to the cross. He disarmed the rulers and authorities and disgraced them publicly, he triumphed over them by him. Having spoiled principalities and powers, he made a show of them. His victory is reflected in Psalm 75:10, "I will cut off all the horns of the wicked, but the horns of the righteous will be lifted up." And his sovereignty over the entire earth in Zechariah 14:9, "On that day Yahweh will become king over all the earth, Yahweh alone, and his name alone." 3.